Yeah, so let's continue to get reaction to those numbers. We are joined by the Youth Employment Services CEO, Mr. Ravi Naidu. Mr. Naidu, good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. And unfortunately, disappointing numbers once again. And I just want to get your initial reaction. If you were somewhat optimistic that we might see an uptick in the employment numbers in the country.
Yeah, no, I was not in terms of the national figures, simply because employment follows economic growth. And if you are following, just the levels of economic growth, the last quarter was 0.1%. So that means we should expect that companies are going to not really be hiring net new jobs. So until we get, higher levels of economic growth, we are in very adverse circumstances for jobs.
Just as you analyze the data, perhaps points that really stand out for you. I mean, for me, what really stood out is we're throughout the day talking about 140,000 less jobs. But if you look at the data in a little bit more detail, we've got 159,000 more people entering the workforce in that quarter. And perhaps your thoughts on really just how fast that group is actually growing in the country.
Yeah. So it's not that we have 140,000 less jobs. We've actually got 16,000 more jobs. So the number of jobs are growing to 16.8 million jobs. But job creation is not keeping up with, as you say, the number of people entering the labor market looking for jobs. So even though we are increasing the number of jobs, we need to generate more jobs much, much faster. So I think that's the challenge we have. So if we look at the official unemployment rate, it's 33.2%. It's slightly worse for women. It's 35%. It's much worse for youth at 46%. And if we include young people who have given up looking for work, it's 58%. So that makes South Africa a big outlier compared to other countries. If you look at Britain, it's 5%. Spain is maybe the worst in Europe, and that's about 10%. Youth, it's about 25%. So we are way an outlier internationally, and that's a big problem because obviously our focus is really around jobs as a whole, but youth in particular, because you have to get them into the labor market. Talented young people need their first chance. Otherwise, we will run out of skills and experience for our key industries, in the future.
Yeah, there is, of course, this bigger debate of just how we're actually collating the data, and I'm keen to hear your views on it. So you've got the entry of input by the Capitec Bank CEO, Ravi, his argument that, in fact, the numbers would look a little bit more encouraging if we, according to him, he says, if we have a better count of the informal sector, who he says is undercounted, that number of unemployment could sit at 10%. What do you make of that?
I do think it's important that we count the informal economy jobs and entrepreneurship jobs better than we're doing at the moment. And I say this as someone who a long time ago was on the Statistics Council for South Africa. So there was always an issue about how one would do the counting, and you will not get it perfectly right. And we know recently Stats SA has been a bit short of resources to do its job. But even if you said we had more jobs, more people working than we picking up, because we're so far ahead or so much worse than other countries in our peer group, it wouldn't change the fact that we have a big problem. It just would mean the magnitude of the problem would not be as bad, but it will still be very bad. So I do think, I don't think it changes the essential condition, which is that we have high levels of unemployment. But I think collecting more data on informal economy and entrepreneurs and self-employment is important, because that's an area where we need to do much more, because big companies are not going to be generating the kind of jobs to keep up with the needs. So how do we help people start their own businesses? How do we support them to grow those businesses and have those businesses become job creators? So I think it's a good debate to have.
Yeah, I'm looking at just what we're seeing from Stats SA in terms of the various provinces and how they're being impacted, right? So you've got increases in employment in Gauteng and the Eastern Cape, but decreases in employment in the Western Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, and the Northern Cape. And I wonder if we do need and have a more targeted approach as to how we look at the various areas in our country. And perhaps it does something to, the challenge that we have of those moving to Gauteng looking for opportunities. You've got the same traffic in the Western Cape, and yet it seems like there's a decrease in employment there as well.
Yeah. Look, it is very hard to read too much into things that move quarter by quarter, because I think if you look at it over a longer period of time, that gives you a better sense of the trend. So, something strange might happen where a couple of programs, might end. So if you look at the data, you'll find that community and social program job numbers have dropped. But to some extent, that could be because maybe some of the public works type programs have ended, and that's caused the drop. But then, when the programs go back on, it increases. So what the longer term story tells us is that the Western Cape has done better in terms of jobs. And Gauteng remains the key economic hub. So you'll find it in this case, doing better than the Western Cape. So I think, so we really need to pay attention to what happens in Gauteng, Western Cape, and of course KZN, the main centers. So they will be competing, by quarter by quarter, depending on what happens. I think the other issue we have to look at is which sectors have the most potential to create jobs over the long term, and how do we, clear the blockages from those. So think of things like tourism. We just got to get those visas through to get, that's a sector that can generate a lot of jobs. And then, the jobs flow into accommodation and transport and restaurants. So that's a good one. Green and renewable sectors are very important because, it helps support so much else in the economy. Fixing our infrastructure, so construction and infrastructure-related sectors are very important because as we fix our infrastructure, we can create jobs. So there's particular things where become very important from a jobs point of view, but we've got to do it not quarter by quarter. We have to have a very concerted partnership between business and government that's going to be over a number of years. Yeah,
an optimistic, I suppose, start there to the sectoral conversation, right? As you look at the sectors that may have green shoots so that we can pour some energy into in the long term, but they are the more sensitive sectors. Agriculture, manufacturing. We obviously heard today that we are offering a revised trade deal with the US, but those are incredibly important sectors that we saw in the second sector shedding jobs. I mean, so the sort of initiatives that we do have in place to cushion those sectors, and if you have confidence in them?
Yeah, so we do have a difficulty with the tariffs and the trade situation with the US, of course, but that's not unique to South Africa. There's a 50% tariff on India and a even higher tariff on Vietnam and Brazil and so on. So I think the world is going through a fairly turbulent period now, particularly given the US, and I think we'd have to find a way to ride it out. I think we have to look at the things we can control ourselves. And that's really, I would say, maybe 3 or 4 things. The first is the extent to which we can really get business and government to agree on how to invest in rebuilding our infrastructure and how to get investor agreements behind key sectors like the one we've spoken about. And I think so that will help from a growth point of view. And obviously, we have to do a lot to look at how we can incentivize companies to hire people, all ages, just make it easier to hire. And in particular, trying to make it easier to hire young people, under 24 years old, I'll say, just to get their first jobs, get their feet in. And probably the third thing is, really looking at how we can promote small businesses and entrepreneurship. There isn't a lot of funding made available for it. There's a lot of red tape in the way. So I think those are things which we have more within our control as a country that we need to really try to make progress on, even while the world is quite turbulent.
Yeah, I'm going to take a shot here at politicking and see, if you're able to bite. But there's, the issue of whether or not the 7th administration, this government of national unity, can turn these things around, if it is a blight on the confidence the South Africans may very well have on their seventh administration. But I think more importantly, as you answer that, and this is, of course, as we close off, for the individual who's watching our discussion and says, I just want to know where to go, I need help. A reminder of what Youth Employment Services, or Service rather, does offer.
Right. So I do think the government, we're having a lot of debate around this national dialogue, and I must be careful what I say there, because I think I'm not a fan myself of dialogue and talk shops unless they lead to some very practical changes. And I think we've had a lot of dialogue. So I think, but there has to be a dialogue on how do we work together to implement programs. How do we unlock the things that are blocking us? And I think a lot of them, so it's not so much the ideas and the policy, but who is raising their hand to make a contribution, and what are the solutions they're bringing to a problem. So we don't really want to hear about more problems. We know about the problems. Let's talk about the solutions. And given that government, the seventh administration and the sixth and the fifth, didn't have the capacity to implement. Government has really deteriorated over these years. From a capacity point of view, it really needs to implement through partnership. So who wants to be in the partnership? What do they bring? And, just almost like a project management approach. So I think that becomes important going forward. And then the last point, what do people do now?
Yeah.
And obviously, Youth Employment Service is a public-private partnership, and it's there where we try to get talented young people into jobs, into the private sector, and hopefully they go on to become entrepreneurs and so on. And it has become the biggest private sector funded program in the world for youth jobs. And we're hoping our youth will be catalytic. And if someone wants to join, you can go to our website, yesforyouth.coza, or you can go to the national database where a lot of the opportunities are made available. It's called sayouth.mobi. And I think that's where we're trying to get some collaboration to the extent that jobs are available in the country, we get people into those.
Yeah. Ravi, an absolute pleasure speaking to you, and thank you so much for availing yourself, Ravi Naidu there, the CEO of the Youth Employment Service. So we're going to stay